so welcome. Anybody here for the talk? Just checking. Okay, cool. Right, well, we'll get started, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you've come for this talk, then you're in the right place. Us, you can go first. You're on the left.
Yeah, why not? So hi, thanks for joining everyone. My name is Jansen, and I'm a developer at IBM, as if the t-shirt didn't give it away. And yeah, I do a lot of stuff around sort of Java, cloud native, but originally I was a biologist. So I'm sort of representing the biology side of things in this talk.
Yes, and I'm representing the everything else. So my name is Steve Poole. I work for Sonotype. I used to work for IBM. I'm a developer advocate, and most of the stuff I want to talk about is security, productivity, supply chains, and stuff like that. And we were talking about this, and Grace has got, as we're going to go see, we're going to go through and compare what human bodies biology does and compare them to maybe how security works or should work and just see who wins, really, isn't it? Yeah. Right, okay. Yes, which I've just said. It is a fun talk. It's a very shallow talk, but hopefully it'll make you think about stuff and it'll get you set up for the rest of the conference. And the most important thing, of course, is that it'll get you fired up to come to the Jeopardy event this evening. And maybe even take part. Okay. So, evolution has a bit of a head start.
Just a little one.
Yes. So we've been growing human beings from, evolving human beings for a long time. And of course, quite recently, we evolved into developers. And somewhere along that line, we lost maybe some of the sense that we should be relying on. Our human bodies tell us stuff, and maybe we could translate some of that into how we think about software. So the question is, are there things we can learn? Yeah. So when you look at security, you can break it into all sorts of ways, but the best way to think is just to look at it like this. So we're going to go through threats and challenges. So we're going to talk about the bad actors are out there. That's from a human being point of view, security point of view, the cyber attacks and things like that. Grace will do the biological side, the squishy stuff. Then we'll talk about prevention, because obviously the best way to be safe is to prevent it happening in the first place. Rebuff all those attacks, and we'll talk about how you don't get ill, how not to get ill. Then we'll talk about, well, if you do get ill, how would you know? Because surprisingly, lots of what there's lots of, in the security space, especially in the software side, we're pretty poor at understanding whether we've been attacked or not. So we'll look at that space. And then lastly, we'll look at what's called mitigation, which is what can you do if you do get hacked? So it's not remediation, sort of upfront, sort of techniques that you can use before you get attacked, so that when you do get attacked, it's less of an event. Okay, right. So, who's heard of cybercrime? Okay, of course you have, right? It's bad, and it's going to continue to get bad because, as we'll go through, it was the next one. Yeah, okay. What's been going on in the last year or two has been a change in the way that people attack our systems, what drives them, their reasons for doing it in the first place. So many of the existing, dare we say, old style way of cybercrime continues. So what are called drive-by attacks, they're the things where some script comes and knocks on the door of your system and tries to get in, right? That's a drive-by attack, because you're just a random victim. You just happen to be in the right place at the wrong time. It's like you leaving your door unlocked and you get burgled because you did that and they were there, and that's just life. They weren't targeting you specifically. That still happens, and actually it's quite pervasive. It's got automated, and it happens anytime. You put a system up on a cloud and you leave, you use the default password, or you leave a port open by mistake, you can be hacked within seconds, right? But it's not personal. Right? Ransomware. Who's heard of ransomware? Anybody been affected by ransomware? Yeah, it's not good, right? Ransomware alone, right? So if we're going to level set about how bad this situation is, right? So ransomware, it's on its own. So this is the idea: they get into your systems and they encrypt your data, and then they very nicely offer to give you your data back for large amounts of money, you know, and that is worth $6 trillion. Okay, so we just again, it's like $6 trillion, right? To put that in context, the usual amount of money that we reckon the illicit drug trade, heroin, cocaine, all that sort of stuff, brings into the bad guys, 450 billion. So you think about all the movies you've seen about the drug trade, you know, putting money in containers and burying it and, you know, all that sort of stuff, and all the great movies, and that's for $450 billion. Ransomware brings in 6 trillion, and that's only a fraction of the total, right? Currently, because it's hard to estimate this because people won't tell you how much they're making, it's in the sort of maybe $20 trillion cost to the whole world, right? That's why this is serious, because it's so lucrative. Right? But for the last 18 months, 2 years, COVID just timed itself properly, because what we began to realize was that something else was going on. This technologies that you're seeing, the ransomware and things like that, it started to become obvious that ransomware wasn't just about making money. It was a way of testing things. And it was being used as a way to test your cyber warfare technologies. So what the aim now is to get into your systems, to get into your power stations, to get into your supermarkets, to get into your train station systems, you name it, get into the chemicals manufacturing, get into supermarkets, the whole thing, right? They want to infiltrate and take control. Because the idea is they want to do this. They want to manipulate it. They want to bring it down when they need to. They want to disrupt it. You may have seen what's the situation in Ukraine. There's been a few things coming out where we're seeing actual cyber warfare techniques, these sorts of things, not only happening, but being published to happening. People getting in, hacking rail systems and signals so that you can't move trains, right? That's become the new reality. Everybody is beginning to understand the value of having these sorts of capabilities. The ability to get into systems and lie there dormant and take control. The ransomware thing is just a wonderful way of checking that it works, because your victim squeals and you go, oh, actually it did work, right? So just think about that, right? It's all about supply chains, because this is all about targeting some part or many parts of a supply chain, because if I can disrupt it, then whatever the war effort you're involved in will get disrupted, right? So everybody, every nation state you can think of, every group that can, is scrambling, some of a big head start, to position themselves to do that system. And that means our systems, because we're all part of the supply chain, are being targeted, right? So they're after a whole bunch of stuff, right? And if you were to take away the motivations and look at actually what they're trying to do, then we can start talking about what you could prevent, how you can prevent this. So they're obviously trying to steal your data because it's valuable. You've got credit card numbers, great. You've got social security numbers, health records, that stuff. That's all valuable because that's worth something to somebody else. They want to change your data. One of the things that continues to be seen is if you have a system that has accounts, you know, whatever it might be, then you'll find people are trying to insert bogus accounts. If you're like a credit checking company, you can imagine that being able to insert bogus accounts can help getting individuals credit and stuff like that. So there's all these sorts of, it's not just take your data, it's change your data, It's changed shipping directions, it's, you know, labels, addresses, and obviously insert new data. They'd like to crash your systems. That's obviously what a denial of service attack is. And of course, if you're trying to position yourself for a cyber warfare, you want to bring systems down, then crashing your systems is great. And also it's a great ransomware thing because you'll pay me to stop crashing your systems. So that's what they'll do. However, the other sneaky thing is they want to use your compute power because guess what? I can do Bitcoin mining. Okay, who's got a build system? Yes, everybody's got build systems. Do you ever check to see what CPU usage it has? In fact, you're probably assuming at peak times it'll do 100%. How much of that 100% is yours and how much of it is theirs doing some Bitcoin mining? Because they're very sophisticated. And then lastly, of course, we're all parts and connected to other systems. So not only do they want to do it to you, they want to exploit you to reach other people. And that is a completely big conversation itself. But ideally, they will either use your reputation, get into your email systems and send emails purporting to you to get access to other systems, or it may just be you're inside, you've got shared networks and things. But basically, can I go from your system to somebody else's system? That's all the things they're trying to do. Okay. Is that scary enough? Yeah? Okay, so.
How does this compare to biology?
I've done the easy bit. Grace, I'll let you do the squishy bit.
So yeah, so we've looked at software, we've seen how there's multiple ways that people are attacking us in software and the various reasons for them attacking us. So let's take a look at biology and see how the two compare. So the bad actors that we have in biology, again, there's a vast array and they attack us in different ways, just like in software. So you've got things like viruses, fungus, parasitic worms, protozoa, bacteria, the list goes on. And I think we're becoming more and more aware of this list as things like COVID happens, etc. Why do they want to attack us? Again, there's a variety of different reasons. They want to use us as a host. The human body is a fantastically warm and cozy place full of food. So they literally just want to come and live in us. They also want to replicate and grow. That's generally the idea of why colds cause us to sneeze, trying to infect other people, etc. And also, sometimes you can have parasites that can use our own bodies for their benefit by sort of taking over. So for those of you that are faint-hearted, don't look at the next slide. This is a beetle, and for those of you who are keen-eyed, it has no insides. So it has literally decayed from the inside out, and the reason it's still able to move is because there's a parasitic worm inside its brain controlling its limb movement. So this is an example of just how extreme that parasitic infection can get. Literally dead and yet still moving. They call them zombie insects because they're literally not alive.
So there, you came to Devnexus and you saw zombies in real life. Amazing.
So comparing it to this analogy that we had, so why are they sort of infecting us? And we can start to see how much we have in common with biological infections and bad actors. So steal your data, well, they want to do the same thing. They want to steal our resources, whether that's our sort of replication devices within our cells, whether that's our energy, for example. They want to change our data, just like Steve was saying. So parasites, for example, and viruses can actually change our DNA. So they can insert virus DNA into our own DNA, so when our cells replicate, they make more viruses automatically. It's ingenious. They also want to take control of our systems, like you just saw with the bug. They want to steal our energy reserves, because we have plenty of it, and it's a very warm environment. And again, they want to go through us to access others. So again, that's how the common cold spreads, that's how flu spreads. They're trying to infect as many as possible to be able to replicate and grow. So you can start to see just how much we have in common in terms of sort of the reasons why and the fact that we're, both in biology and in software, constantly being attacked. So we're going to go through 3 rounds. We're going to go through as like a versus style. So if you want to pick your side, pick mine, then you can. First round is, as Steve said, prevention.
Yes. Oh, it's yours. I was going to say, right, it's like, okay, what's the equivalent of software for zombies? And I was thinking, actually, if you think about it, how often are you, if you're an AWS user or Azure or whatever, you get some email saying, hey, you spent more money because you have this service running. And you go, damn, I forgot to turn that off. But occasionally it's not what happened. Occasionally you got hacked and somebody just fired something up on your bill. All right, so that's probably the closest I can think of to a zombie. But anyway, okay.
So when it comes to prevention, the body has like loads of different methods through which it can try and prevent infections from coming in. So you've got a mixture of sort of like ones that just happen to sort of be there, that are just innate, as we call it, the innate immune system, and then you've also got adaptive as well. So when it comes to the innate immune system, we're talking about like skin, for example, so the fact that things can't get through our skin, which is super helpful because it covers most of our body. Having minimal orifices, so limiting the entry points through which they can enter into our systems, and having extra defenses at those openings. Things like saliva, stomach acid, etc., mucus in your nose, teardrops in your eyes. All of these are additional defenses that we deliberately put in place because we know these are the places that are most likely for an infection to get in. We've also developed enhanced sensors. So for example, our sense of smell, our sense of taste. If we open a milk carton and it's gone off, we're going to smell that and probably not want to drink it because we know that that's not going to be great for our stomachs. So we've developed these enhanced sensors to be able to, again, add that extra layer of prevention before it even gets near us. And we've also got things like within our body. So we've got things like cell identification techniques. So if you imagine a cell as sort of like a sphere, on that sphere there's loads of different like flags that represent different things, usually proteins. And there's certain flags that identify these cells as our own. So that means that if there's a cell that enters the body and it has a different flag, or perhaps the flag has been mutated, our body can kind of identify it and be like, it's not quite ours, probably shouldn't be here, and start to do things about it. And then other things like behavioral changes. So the fact that if you think back to cavemen, we invented fire for a reason. Being able to cook our food meant that we were able to kill a lot of those infections before we ate them. So having these behavior changes, even recently, starting to wear masks for COVID, adding in these behavior changes is a form of prevention in itself. So as well as behavior and senses and physical things like our skin, the body really is amazing at adding in these additional stages to try and prevent that initial infection.
Cool.
What about you?
What about software? Well, what do you think? Are we like that? Well, let's talk about orifices. Well, we have our own orifice prevention system. It's called API gateways. So we could manage the number of orifices we make available, but unfortunately, quite often we don't because we tend to have extra endpoints that maybe we forgot, or maybe we think like test endpoints that don't have security around them. So we do have them, but perhaps they're not as well used as they could do. Not good. Security checks and input validation. Well, actually, they always say that 90% of all the attacks that take place could be prevented by us doing better data input validation. Right? We, again, tend not to be very good at it. We're very good at the individual piece. We're very good at I've got some data in, and it's in the range of 0 to 100, which is valid, that's okay. We're not very good at going, well, I've got that field which is okay, and that field that's okay, and that field's okay, but together, they're not very good because they're, for whatever reasons, that's a bad combination. So we do good security checks at a very low level. We tend to fail when we get further up, so not very good. So we can do some basic prevention, but we tend, as developers, to rely on this API gateway, which mostly isn't actually by developers. So it's run by somebody else. So it's a bit weird. It's like somebody else owns your skin. It's really weird, yeah. Okay, dependency management tools. Well, we're getting a lot better at that. We have all learnt log4j, log4j shell, all those things, yes. We've learnt the value of keeping your dependencies up to date, because if they have a vulnerability in, then obviously you want to fix that. And that's probably the nearest we've got to vaccination. And obviously, the quicker you can do that from being told that there's a virus out there or a vulnerability, that's good. And believe us, these things are getting worse. And if you imagine what I was saying about what's happening in the world in terms of the reasons and the motivations, you can imagine these vulnerabilities that are being discovered and even created now are becoming more vicious, more nasty. Do you have any biology that gets in and just sits there?
Yeah, there's some where you have like dormant viruses and they will wait for the right time.
Yeah.
Where they'll just sit there, comfortable in your body, dormant until the right time comes, whatever they need, and then they'll start replicating.
Cool. Okay. So what's the last one? Automated high-speed CI/CD. Well, I'd like to say everybody has one of those, but obviously it turns out that that's not quite true. Most of us have build systems that you press buttons and things happen, but the triggers tend to be human beings. And so in the situation where vulnerability turns up, say Log4j is a really good example. Log4j, where were you on the 9th of December? Because I remember, right? Log4j gets announced. We start saying you have to do something about it. And a good fraction of the world gets their act together. And within a few days, they've updated their systems. And that's driven by, obviously, CI/CD systems, because you want to update and you want to test it works. Guess how many people, as a percentage of people who use Log4j, still working on an older version of Log4j? 40%. 40, okay? Because for whatever reasons, they're not paying attention, or they have manual systems and it's all complicated, or they do it by hand. So if you don't have a CI/CD system that's able to quickly update vulnerabilities and prove everything's okay, then you're more likely to be attacked. Okay, doesn't sound good, does it? Okay, summary. Skin. No, not really. We have a sort of, occasionally we have some skin. We're a bit patchy. Minimal orifices, no, because developers are very good at creating extra endpoints. Right? I cannot tell you the number of times I have seen situations, had conversations with people who've created test endpoints. And they've said, we don't need to put security on this because it's a test endpoint. And you go, yes, but it can still be used by the bad guys. And they're going, but it's a test endpoint. Okay, yeah. So we're not going to that. What else have we got on here? Developers may not be the first line of defense, but they are key to prevention. Yes. What it comes down to is that you as developers are the ones that sort of, obviously the first line of defense. And if you don't have good security hygiene in your head, if you're not doing the right sort of activities, then in many ways you're culpable for what happens with the bad guys getting in, because there are these basic things we could do, right? As you said, because it's like washing hands. Security hygiene is something that we're not very good as a developer because we haven't learnt that. We don't have the memory muscle for that. But we are good at wearing masks and washing hands. So that's okay, yeah? Yes. I just don't like talking about this because it's like, oh my God. All elements of software lifecycle require attention, yes. Let me ask you this. How many people here have downloaded something from the internet? How many of you have you've got a problem and you Google for it and they say, what you want to do is use this Maven thing, and you've got some dependency and you cut and paste it from Stack Overflow and you stick it in your POM, or maybe you're a bit more sophisticated. Maybe you go to Maven Central and get the latest version and you put it in your POM. We all do that, don't we? I mean, yeah, absolutely. How many of you check the license of the thing that you've just added? Maybe, okay, right. How many of you checks the provenance, i.e., just because somebody on Stack Overflow says that's the right answer, how do you know that that package is any good? Did you go to the open source project it came from and look at it? Probably not. Oh, maybe, okay. Right, now the thing that you've just installed, it has its own dependencies. Do you know what they are? Do you go check those? No, right? We are very good at consuming software. We don't have the software security hygiene that we need, and we need to get better at that because of the fact that these bad guys are more sophisticated and they are creating the viruses and the vulnerabilities that they want to exploit themselves in these downstream dependencies and in the downstream open source projects that you're consuming, right? So because you don't have the wash your hands security hygiene, you tend to let, or you are letting in more nasties, and more nasties are going to continue.
We'll be kind, because realistically these things are possible, right? Everything you've described is something that we can pick up. So we'll call it a draw for this round.
Okay, I accept that. I accept that. Okay, next one.
So round 2, I feel like we need like a round...
Ding ding, okay, round
detection.
2, yes.
So in terms of biology, again, attacks are inevitable, right? There are always new versions of viruses, that, things are always evolving and updating, so even if we have these prevention methods, something's going to get in at some point. There's very few human beings who are never infected with anything. You'll have had a common cold at some point, or a flu, or something else. So when they get into our bodies, it's really important that we're able to detect them to then be able to mitigate that factor. So we have a variety of different detection devices, and this is where the adaptive immune system comes in. So this is things like white blood cells, things like antibodies, which are the little Y-shaped things you can see on the image. And they're specifically designed to be able to attach to these protein flags on these different bacterial cells. And we're able to rapidly learn. So as we get infected with new things, we can then learn what these new things are to be able to recognize them quicker next time they infect our body. That's the whole point of vaccines. Vaccines enable your body to basically, it's like a test run. The vaccine is a dead version of that virus or of that infection, and so it allows your body to basically say, hey, you should be recognizing this, because next time you get it, it's probably the real thing. And so that enables us to learn what these bad actors look like to be able to detect them faster. Again, things like, so I mentioned the extra protection by enabling us these behavioral changes using vaccines to enable this detection to be quicker, and other detection as well. So you might not think about it, but pain can often be a really good detection sign. Something's not quite right somewhere. Sometimes that pain is distributed and deferred to other places, because sometimes you just don't have the ability in your body to produce that pain. But pain is a really good way of saying, like, if I haven't drunk enough water today and I get a headache, that's my body telling me, okay, you should probably drink more water, get rid of the headache. Sometimes we mask those detection techniques with painkillers, and sometimes that's not necessarily helpful. But overall, we have a pretty good detection system in our bodies.
Yeah, so I hadn't really thought about it, but obviously biology continues to evolve, the attacks continue to evolve, and actually that's what's happening with us in the software world, where the types of attack, the timescales we have, the level of sophistication is just growing. Yes. Okay. What do we got next? Software detection. Yes. Okay. So we have some software detection, but actually it's still a bit crude. Having said that, I was just thinking, you were talking about, you get a headache and it's like telling you to drink more. I was thinking it's quite good that you just get a pain, because you don't really want to have a voice in your head telling you that you should drink more water. That would probably not be too good. Yeah. So what happens, what do we do in terms of detection, right? How do we know that we've been attacked? Well, the most obvious thing, if it's the right circumstances, is your system dies, right? Which is not the greatest, thing to happen. If you think biology, human bodies are much better at surviving this sorts of stuff, because you never get to be rebooted, do you? It's like you get one chance of this. So from a software point of view, you get your system crashes, right? And that's obviously a big thing. Complaints about performance, another indirect thing. That's sort of your developers, your consumers, your users take the pain, and you're sitting there going, I don't know what's wrong, but everybody's telling you the system's slow, right? And that's another indirect sign. It might be not just your end users, it might be your build systems are slow. There's all sorts of things, and you're going, I just don't get the performance we're supposed to be getting. That's probably the other big thing we have. Ransomware is another good sign that you've been hacked, and that it's, but it's a bit late. Because to be honest, mostly, unless it's a very small attack from a ransomware point of view, you're never going to recover. The stats are that you as a company, if you have a significant ransomware attack, that's it. Because these guys, even if you pay them, what you find that a lot of them do will give you back keys to access some of your data, but they may not give it back to all, give you keys to access all of them because they want more money from you. And sometimes they just won't give you the keys in the first place because why would they? All they care is getting money from you. And if you die, why do they care? Yeah. And then the last sort of gross thing that you might see is that somebody tells you that your data's on the dark web. And, sometimes that's impossible to trace back to you, but often it turns out to be something very specific and they get found. There are people out there who are looking, good guys are out looking at what's on the data on the dark web because obviously these are all signs of attacks and intrusions and stuff like that. So you never know, you might get the local, local FBI or somebody might come up and say, hey, we found your data on the dark web. Did you leave it there? Right? Not good, really. Right. There are tools that we can use that will help us and will put the pain into the system so that we can see them. A lot of them are sort of like indirect because they're going to look at patterns and things. There are obvious things like on the front end you have API gateways, so it's great. There's also a whole bunch of tech out there that you can use that spots the patterns of the URL requests, and the more you pay, the more sophisticated attacks you can detect. And so you can see denial of service attacks forming. You can see that people are probing your APIs because you can see them wandering through each of through all the URLs and stuff like that, but only if you've got them. If you haven't got those, your application's not going to see that because we don't write code to do that sort of detection. If you think about it, when we write code and we get input, we do stuff, we do something. As long as the request that comes in is, as far as we're concerned, valid, that's all we do. We never build anything into the system that says, yeah, I know that's a valid request, but this guy's added $5 to his account 400 times in a row. Maybe there's something wrong. Right? We don't tend to think about adding those things into the system. Right? So maybe you should think about that. Other bits and pieces, occasionally we'll have things that look at the resource usage. AWS builds a really good sign that you're doing something wrong, yeah, but it's all mostly indirect. And where the main thing is to think about how you can think about designing your application so that you can be more aware of the fact that your system may not be dying, it may not be doing bad things, but it's starting to behave in perhaps not the greatest activity, not greatest way. What do we get to? Detection. Yeah, yes. Biology, as we said, the trouble is, yes, overall, evolution benefits as us as individuals succumb to things and our offspring learn and we pass it on to your DNA. But at the end of the day, if an individual dies, that's it. So that's not the greatest. So obviously, from a biological point of view, you want to keep systems, us, alive and healthier for longer. We don't do that in software. We're just really, really poor at understanding that bad things are happening because we have this black and white view. We're coders. We write things. It's true or it's false. Right? We're not very good at spotting those weird behaviors. And if you think about it, if you're writing code to a spec, you're having some conversation, the chances are you never have a conversation about what reasonable behavior looks like because it's not part of what we consider, right? So what have you got to do to get a little bit better so that we can at least hold our heads up a little bit, right? So I will say, you've got to go look at the tools that are out there. As a developer, you may not have a choice in the tools that get used, but if you have a look at the tools that are being used, you can understand what you can do to play better with it. It's the same. So intrusion tools are really good. Logging tools. There's always somewhere that the logs are being caught. there are logging tools out there that will, quite sophisticated things now, that can look at the patterns that are coming out in your logs and tell you that they can record what's called good behavior and can tell you that things aren't going so well. They can spot that they're getting the same request to the API over 400 million different IP addresses because a botnet's attacking you. Your application wouldn't see that because you probably done a microservice, you just get a call, right? But you can do more to help if you log out the fact that things are happening. Because one thing else that developers are poor at doing is writing good log information, because it's what are logs for? They're for you to diagnose problems. They're not there as a way of giving people indications of the trends of your application usage. So if you start looking at the tools that are being used at the front end and the back end and understand what your role is in terms of providing information to those systems, we get a better, secure system. Okay, round three.
So this is all about, okay, once we've been infected, what are we going to do about it? So as Steve was saying, it is arguably more important in biology that we actually do something about it, because there isn't any, after the system crash. So in biology, we have a bunch of different mitigation techniques. So one is the vaccines like I was talking about, because those vaccines allow us to increase our levels of white blood cells and our ability to recognize those infections. So that allows us to, once we get infected, actually identify and get rid of them quicker. That kind of leads into the whole adaptive immune system, the fact that we're able to learn so quickly to be able to then mitigate any attack in future. We also have various different techniques like making our body less habitable. In the average human being, we're a pretty cozy temperature. Whereas actually when we get infected, often you'll get things like a fever, your body will start to shiver, you'll get quite hot and uncomfortable. But actually that's your body's way of making it uncomfortable, not for you necessarily, but for the things that are trying to grow inside you. So there's a reason that we get uncomfortable, is because we're trying to make them uncomfortable to stop them from being able to replicate as quickly and to hopefully try and kill them in the process. We also have various different ways of getting rid of foreign cells. So a lot of the time our white blood cells will actually just consume the bacteria or the viruses and break it down with acids. But some of the time it doesn't get to our white blood cells. Some of the time it's through expulsion of liquids, shall we say. Either way, out of the system. So we're able to get rid of infections that way as well. We also have an amazing ability to be able to coat our DNA in specific molecules that help suppress viruses that are trying to insert data into our data sources. And again, things like limiting access into our bodies and patrolling those access routes. So our white blood cells are constantly patrolling, trying to find any infections, learning from that, and trying to keep our body as healthy as possible. So we've got loads of different mitigation factors.
Yeah, and it's all very active.
Yes.
It's
all
active
adaptive,
systems.
it's all
Yeah.
agile,
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at that list and thinking, I'm not sure what software vomit looks like, but I'm sure we'll find out. But I'm thinking, well, what on there could I argue that we could do things in the software point of view? And I'm going, well, vaccines we talked about in terms of dependencies and making sure that you've got the latest versions of things. That's good. That's sort of a vaccine. Learning what's going on. When I said about watching, detecting things, so we could do that. That means investing in the right sorts of tools. Making the body less habitable, well, sometimes that's looking at your resource allocations, how much memory you've allocated, because you've allocated this much memory because occasionally you need it, to thinking about whether it would be better to reduce it and start catching the fact that every so often, for some reason, you go over the limit and start looking into why that's happening. So maybe you could think a bit more about reducing the resource usage that you've got and figuring out why you get these peaks, dealing with them differently. Maybe certain APIs have different resource requirements, and maybe you could carve those out, but start thinking differently about it. And the rest of it, Well, the funny thing is that when you start looking at what makes good software, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Because amazingly, we've been doing software, well, for a long time. I mean, even longer than me. I mean, the people I learned from probably had spent 50 years learning from somebody else. So we know what the rules are. We know what we should do, okay? We're not going to go anywhere near this. OWASP, fabulous place, but there are loads of books. There are loads of guides out there. And again, as developers, we tend to ignore this stuff because nobody puts it on the table as, you do this stuff, don't you? Right? And you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff. We're not going to go through it, right? Because actually when you start reading, it's like, well, this is fairly obvious, really. The question is whether you want to do it. Beyond following the right guidelines, it also turns out there's amazing correlation between the quality of your code and your ability to be hacked. Now, if you think about what I said about validation, what the bad guys will try to do is they will try to understand what your application does, and they will try to drive your application through the routes that you were not expecting. If your application is good quality, well structured, the routes that you can go down are very obvious to you because you've designed it that way and you're policing them. If you have complicated code with lots of if, else, this things, then the bad guys can find routes in. They're very good at getting hold of the endpoints and playing with them to see what happens. Because they're sophisticated people, they have great tools. So code quality makes a big difference in terms of just keeping you safer because you can reason about your code better, you know? Who knew, right? But there's more than just code quality. There's also the way that you think about how you design your software. We are very good as developers at putting things into our code that's for our benefit. Right? So if you look at Log4j as a really good example, right? Log4j has been around, the Log4Shell problem has been around since 2014. We only just learnt about it, which itself is a problem. But if you dig into it, what happened was a series of features were added by people that made their life easier, right? And what the bad guys want, well, yeah, you made your life easier, but you've given me flexibility. So a lot of what you've got to do now is start taping back I'll make it easy for me and make it just more precise. So this example would be a classic example of, hey, I need to provide the address to some client. I have an API and they want the address, right? And I have a database, maybe it's a Mongo document or something, which has got all my client data in, you know, where they live, postcodes, credit card details, whatever, okay? And what we're very good at is going, I'm going to give the API that just wants the address, the whole lot, because it's easier, right? And that's such a bad thing to do. This idea is what you need to do is think very hard about the data that you give out and going, what's this data for? So if I have somebody who needs a shipping address, just give them the data that needs the shipping address. Don't give them everything else because it might be useful later on, right? Or because it's easier for you as a developer to do that. It's like, no, just break it out and design your APIs along usage, right? It sounds really easy, really simple, but we tend to take shortcuts. And we go, yeah, there's an API that gives you the address, but it gives you just the same amount of data as if I called another API, right? And then the data that you give out, think about how easy it would be to use it. So for instance, you could, if asked to give a sequence of dates, a schedule, you could just say, well, I've got all the dates, I'll give you the dates. That is machine readable. What you've got to understand, you know, I talked about the drive-by and about how people are probing your system. This is automated, absolutely 100% automated. Boom, 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 boom. They're going to go down your APIs. Right now what happens is you deploy something, it's probed, a generic probe happens, they work out what type of system it is, because you tend to give some clues. Then within a few minutes, you'll get a targeted payload, right? And this is no human beings involved. This is botnets just exploring. And they will steal your data. and they will look at the data, scripts, and go, oh, so this is interesting. And they'll wake a human being up who will then come and start probing. If you make it harder for those scripts to figure out what's going on, they'll move on to somebody else. And in this example is, don't give out raw dates. Change your APIs that somebody maybe asks you like from some range, and then give out offsets. I mean, this is just a made-up example, but you get the idea. Don't give out raw data if you can do it differently, because presumably you're having the person at the other end of this API is somebody you can talk to. Maybe it's you, maybe it's a client, but at least you've got a developer who could write code. You haven't got scripts who are just trying to figure out what your API is doing, and you're making it easy for them, right? And related to that is developers are still very good with the onion model of security. That's the, I have no authority, or I'm a super user, I have everything, I have root access, right? Because it's easier. Because when you start talking about having granular access control, it gets harder. You know, it's this, you don't want to have that model of, well, I can give you this data with this model, with this level of authentication, but if you want this, I have to give you not only access to the data you want, but all the other data, because the bad guys can exploit that. Remember, we're just trying to make it harder for them. So you construct your APIs and on the data that you need to provide to do the service that you're offering, and you make it only, you can do auth keys, whatever, but it's this person wants to do this, that's all they can do. If they want to do this, that's all they can do, right? That's a much safer model than the, baby versus Superman thing. Yeah. Report unexpected errors. So we're talking about mitigation. This isn't things that you do after you've been attacked. These are things that you do now so that when you do get attacked, the damage is less. And unexpected behavior. If you think about it, we all talk about writing stateless microservices, because that scales. Your microservice might be stateless, but your data isn't. You can know what was the last action that would take place. You have an account, you have a client, something happened. What's the next reasonable state to happen from that? If that's not what comes in next, now it may be, okay, it's reasonable that this person's just put $5 in and now they've put another $5 in. Okay, maybe that, but it's a bit worrying. Okay, they've done it 3 times. No, it's very worrying. It's still legal, but I should be reporting, I should be logging the fact that strange things are happening. And that requires you to think about what data you hold and how you update that state. But again, your application, your microservice can be stateless, but the data that you hold can contain that stateful information, right? And think about this, that the attackers aren't going to sit on your one browser and go bunk, 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 bunk. No, they got botnets. So it isn't an attack from one IP address, it's an attack from random ones. So again, that's another sign. Okay, so I got this IP address connecting to this account, and now I've got this IP address connected to the same account. Okay, maybe that happens because IP addresses change. Oh look, I've got 10 of them. Okay, something bad's going on. Hopefully your intrusion detection systems can pick that one up. But again, it's like, can you think about those sorts of circumstances in the way that your application is designed? Could you spot that unusual behavior? Right? Yes. Oh, and the last tip is, paradoxically, if you put too much information into your log, you can help the bad guys, because logs occasionally become publicly accessible, either because you inadvertently publish them on the web because somebody misconfigures, or your network gets compromised, your system gets compromised, and people can look at the logs. And that's great, because then they can probe the API and see what turns up in the log. Right? So it's a sort of careful balancing system. Okay. Other things, yes. Again, it's all about us writing code that's easier for us. So we are very good at thinking about the happy path. I do this, and I'll have some code, and if this method I call throws an IO exception. It never happens, and it doesn't matter because it'll never happen. So I'll ignore it. How many people have ignored errors, exceptions? Yes, yes. We all do it because you go, oh, no, what the hell? But if you start thinking about this, you go, okay, you got an exception. So what sort of exceptions could I have? Well, yeah, the file might not be there. That might be valid. So in which case I'll go, yeah, that was the sort of error expecting. But if I get some other type of IO exception, and bearing in mind there's lots of them, well, you may go, okay, there's something going on here, something serious, right? It might be just simple that the system's corrupted, but it could be something else. But if you don't think about them and log them with that level of granularity, nobody else is going to spot it. There's nothing else there that's going to spot that you're ill, right? Test your dependencies. People go, what? Okay. There are sort of two things here. We write a little tiny bit of code, and the rest of our application comes from open source, right? Pretty much. 90% of our application comes from open source. Now, whether that's dependencies or because you're running on a framework or you're running on Linux or whatever, it's all open source, okay? And we just assume they're going to do what they do all the time. There are two things to think about. One is, why did you choose that piece of open source in the first place? And how do you know that the people producing that open source are good people? Do you do any checking? And it's not a point-in-time statement, because that's today, right? Tomorrow, somebody may have gone and hacked those systems, right? So before you even choose to, before you start testing them, you have got to be better at assessing whether the community, the project, the framework knows what they're doing, and they have good signs that you can feel comfortable with them. Right, but then the second thing is you're relying on APIs to do things. You're relying on the JDK to do things. You're relying on frameworks to do things. Write tests to prove that the APIs that you're relying on do what they say, because tomorrow they may not. Right? And the other thing you'll discover when you start doing this is that your assumptions about what they can and can't do will be wrong. One of the classics that we put up in terms of these things is, you've all seen the ... / thing, right? And I say to people, okay, so if I put a URL in, which is ... / who's going to validate it? Right? And if you dig into it, you'll find that nobody will validate it because it's a valid path. And if you can go through, you can go to the Java file API, and they'll pass that through to the C code underneath, which will pass it to the Linux or the Windows runtime, and they'll all go, that's a valid path, right? So you've got to look at the APIs that you're consuming, write tests to prove they do what you expect, but also to catch if their behavior changes. Right. Oh, and the picture on the thing, this came up recently, and it happens quite often, but it's just one of those examples where somebody, very nice person, has been providing open source technology for people to use, got very unhappy about the situation, and changed his codes to say, depending where in the world you are, I'm going to wipe the contents of your disk. So that's pretty extreme, but that's what happens now. So the fact that the thing you've used now does it, the next version may not. You have to look at how these things behave and start building in your protection. I know it's a load of work, but that's where we're going. Right. Oh yeah. How long before exploitation? When we started to talk about Java security and about vulnerabilities, which has been about 15 years, I think, in the Java space before it really percolated, we talked about time, right? So the years on the bottom, the number of average days from publication of a vulnerability to it being exploited. In the good old days, i.e. 2006, somebody would find a vulnerability and they'd publish it, And you had 45 days to have it fixed before some bad guy turned up, on average. All right, and we got away with it. And then log4j, well, it turns out log4j had been in this, log4shell had been around since, the vulnerability has been around since 2014. And other ones have shown us that effectively there is no window. We have now flipped. We are now in a world where it's exploit first. So every time that you see a vulnerability, how long have we got left? Are we over? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's important to understand that you don't have any time. Major vulnerabilities will be exploited before you get a fix. So you have no time. You have to fix immediately. Okay, sorry, I ranted.
So in summary, again, I won that round. Claiming this win. Biology has very strong adaptive mitigation strategies, and that's because there are serious consequences. We don't have any reboots, we only have one life, so it is critical for us to be able to adapt to these changing environments and these changing infections. But there are things we can learn from it.
Exactly.
And there are strategies we can take away.
Yeah, and these aren't strategies that you can ignore because you may have reboots, but your company doesn't. Hey, how does it, we knew this. Look, we put a slide up. We didn't even, yeah.
So the winner is Mother Nature.
Yeah, thank you. Is that it? Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay. Loads of stuff, whatever. Yes, I know it's been weird, but thank you for sticking with it. Hopefully it's at the very least opened your eyes, at least to zombie, whatever they were, beetles. But it's serious business, and joking aside, you've really got to start looking at how you develop software and really start becoming aware of the fact that the world is not the way that it was when you learned to program.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.